ability to control her own reproductive future has resulted in untold misery. That's Christianity having an effect on the world, not just for overpopulation, but for sexually transmitted diseases, for example. If the Pope would just get up and say one good thing about birth control, think how that would improve the world, but he's too religious. He's too religious to really care about human values. So the wars that have been caused, look at the 30 Years' War in Europe. You know what that was primarily about? There were at least 3 million, maybe 10 or 11 million people who were killed in that war in Europe, in the 30 Years' War. You know what it primarily started over? Confessional differences, like transubstantiation and infant baptism. Protestants and Catholics killing each other. Even though Paul said in 1 Corinthians, let there be no divisions among you, you should all think of one mind. Christianity has caused untold misery in the world. So we could go on and list a lot of the other, opposition to sex education in the schools, for example, opposition of liberalization of divorce laws, for example, which is just happening in Ireland, and the environment. A lot of believers, a lot of Christians who are opposed. They think this world is not my home. This world we live in is just a stepping stool. And if you look at the entire garden, not just a flower here and a flower there, if you look at the whole picture, we have to say, yes, many Christians have done good things for the world, but Christianity itself, as a religion coming out of the Bible, Christianity itself has been, on balance, more damaging and more hurtful to the world than good.
You want to check your mic real quick to make sure it's on? Yeah, from the table. Save you some exercise. You don't have to burn a calorie. This is mic 6. Here, turn it on the bottom. There's a... If that doesn't work, we have to start praying.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a little red button on mine. Ask God to help you.
I got you. Oh, there you go. You're good. All right. Now Mr. Curry will have a 6-minute rebuttal. 6-minute rebuttal to Dan's opening statement.
All right. Well, Dan mentioned a lot of things that are bad things, the 30 Years' War and stuff along those lines. But as I said, this is not a debate about whether the world was better with Christianity. As I suspected, Dan has chosen to dedicate a significant portion of his time to debate and irrelevancy. Additionally, when Dan has mentioned some of the bad things that are happening today, for example, some little girl that's prevented from receiving medical treatment, he's likewise citing anecdotes, not actual data. I've cited large, broad-based studies that involve hundreds of thousands of people. And Dan is citing just fun stories, or sad stories, as the case may be. I think that we recognize which of those two is more reliable. We can find anecdotes of anything. I can find anecdotes of atheists that are horrible, horrible people. But anecdotes don't really cut it. What you need are better sources of information. I hope that Dan has some significant peer-reviewed research that he's going to be presenting later on. He hasn't done so far. Nevertheless, while most of what Dan has said is irrelevant one way or another, I think it deserves to be engaged so that I don't bore you guys. He's mentioned a few things. First of all, the health of the little girl. As I said, on average, Christians in the United States have better health than non-Christians. Secondarily, he mentions how Christianity is oppressive to women. Nevertheless, speaking globally, women comprise 2/3 of all practicing Christians. If it was really as bad as Dan makes it out to be, those numbers would be difficult to explain. Further, he talks about gays, and this is an interesting point. I don't want to misrepresent myself. I'm here on behalf of Christianity. Speaking personally, I am a fairly conservative Protestant. Indeed, my denomination is the SBC, as Dan has said. And so I have my own particular views on that. Nevertheless, if I were to ask you, of the 19 different countries in the world which have legalized same-sex marriage, and I asked you to guess what percentage of those countries were countries with either a majority Christian population or at least a plurality Christian population, what would you maybe guess is the number? I mean, I can give you a hint. The number starts with a 1, ends with a 0, and it's 3 digits long. Every single country that has legalized same-sex marriage is within the broader domain of what used to be called Christendom. whether that be in Europe, like the Netherlands, whether it be in North America, like Mexico and the United States in certain jurisdictions, whether it be in South America, like with Argentina, whether it be in places like South Africa. Every single country that has legalized same-sex marriage has been to some extent, Christian country, at least in terms of its cultural background. Now, that doesn't prove that Christianity is the thing driving this, but nevertheless, it is an interesting idea, as Damon Linker has written in The Week, in his article, How Christianity Gave Us Gay Marriage, on February 19th, 2014. The principles which are driving the campaign to legalize same-sex marriage are admittedly Christian principles. Speaking for myself, I believe that these are misapplications of Christian principles, but they are Christian principles nevertheless. He speaks about wars that have been fought. Again, yes, there have been unfortunate religious wars. Again, though, they are irrelevant to the topic of today's debate. These are wars, as Dan mentioned, the 30 Years' War, centuries old. But even more to the point, religious wars, and especially Christian wars, are extremely uncommon, statistically speaking. Scott Atran, writing in Foreign Policy on August 6, 2012, wrote the article God in the Ivory Tower, in which he indicated that religion accounts for less than 7% of all the wars fought in history. And if you were to exclude, say, Islamic conflicts or conflicts that involve Islam as the primary militant, the number drops in half and represents about 1% of all the war dead. Not a great thing, but again, neither an atrocious thing. Things like territory, glory, pride, and money are responsible for a great deal more conflict. Even things like democracy are responsible for a great deal more conflict. And yet I don't think anyone else would say that on that basis the world is worse with democracy because people have used it as an excuse to go to war. I'll leave it at that.
Dan Barco now get a 6-minute rebuttal.
So you're arguing that Christianity was really bad and horrible for the world up until now. Now it, right? Ignore what happened in the past. Ignore the history. Ignore the fact that many of our culture, many of our standards stem from the past. You're arguing that today, finally, Christianity has got its act together and now it's good. Even though the fact that the Bible itself is what Christianity is based on, and the Bible says that homosexuals shall be killed, their blood shall be upon them. And you didn't tell us what your personal views are, but your own church says that homosexuality is an illness. It's a wrong in the world. I hope you're smarter than your church and you realize the facts of science. But there's a serious problem with a lot of these surveys that you are quoting, and that is the fact that we know that Christians, especially Christians, but believers, exaggerate on surveys. There have been many surveys that show this. For example, with church attendance. Historically, about 40% of Americans regularly report that they go to church regularly. And that's a pretty big number. 40% of Americans have for decades reported that. But when you actually count the people in the pews, the studies that actually don't just take the word of the person on the telephone, but you actually count them in the pews, it comes out about 19% actually show up. Christians who respond to surveys are likely to double. And this is just common among survey taking, the tendency to over-report socially desirable things and to under-report socially undesirable things, like substance abuse among teenagers, for example. Another example is tithing. 17% of Americans report that they tithe to their church regularly, 10% of their gross or net income. I don't know if you know the figure in your own church, but they actually counted how many people actually do tithe. Even though 17% report that they tithe, only 3% actually do tithe. So when pollsters call up a Christian and say, does your Christianity make you happier? Yes, it does. I think what a lot of these surveys are actually showing is that atheists are more honest in surveys.
Remember what I said, I'll ask the audience to hold applause until after the person's finished.
Regarding health, for example, many of these surveys that show that people who go to church are healthier than those that not. Especially, there was a survey in Florida where they looked at older people, and they found out that older people who regularly go to church are actually healthier than those that don't. But then someone pointed out, well, the ones that are too sick to go to church don't go to church. It's only the healthy that go to church. So it's not proving anything. It's just showing that you have to be healthy in order to go to church. Crime, if non-believers are more likely to commit crime, then why is it that in the federal prison system right now, only 0.02% of the population reports that they are atheists? The rest, 99 point whatever that is, report that they are believers. The jails are full of people who believe in God. Atheists are not committing these crimes. Atheists can commit crime. There are some atheists in prison, but they are greatly underrepresented in the prison system. So it's your churchgoers, your friends. You know George Barna's studies. George Barna is a born-again Christian, and you know about his research out of Santa Barbara. George Barna has written these books castigating the church for failing to do a better job. And he's the one who points out that born-again Christians have a higher divorce rate than non-Christians. Southern Baptists are about 29%, others are down in here. And atheists and Roman Catholics are at the bottom at 23%. Among people who have been married, about 23%. So a lot of these studies are suspect, and what are they actually showing? I think they're showing that believers believe they have better lives, and they tell pollsters that they have better lives than the non-religious. And how do you connect the dots? What you are reporting to us is what a group of people within a certain majority demographic of the country report to us. But how do you connect the dots between that and Christianity? In Japan, for example, health is very high, and crime is very low in Japan, but they're not Christians. In Japan, they are basically non-believers. But would you say, therefore, their commitment to health and well-being is due to their non-belief, or is it due to their commitment to health and well-being? So I don't think you're connecting the dots between Christianity and the religion itself and these surveys themselves. There was a recent Gallup poll. Is my time up? No, oh, okay. There was a Gallup poll which just came out just this last month, where people reported their well-being, as you were mentioning. And it is true. There were three groups of people: the very religious, the moderate religious, and the non-religious. The very religious in America report, 69% of them report well-being in their life. Their life is great, right? The moderate religious report, 63% of them report that they have well-being in their life. That's not a big difference, but it's a difference. Both around 2/3 of the population. Where do you think the non-religious fell in that survey? Where would you guess? Where would you guess the non-religious fell in reporting well-being? It just came out, so you might not have seen it. 65%. The non-religious fell in at 65. So 63, 65, 69% of Americans, religious or not, are reporting lives of well-being. So maybe that is statistically significant. Maybe there is a statistician would say, yeah, there's a difference there. But combine that with the fact that we know that Christians are over-reporting. Christians are not honest in these surveys. It throws your conclusions into doubt.
Mr. Curry will now get a second rebuttal round, 6 minutes.
All right, Dan. You have stated that while I've been able to cite peer-reviewed research conducted by university-based researchers, published in mainstream academic journals, that we should ignore that because the studies are unreliable. When you hear something similar from a creationist concerning carbon dating, I doubt you're inclined to take all that seriously. You have trust that secular researchers at mainstream international universities can do their research well enough to screen out problems. And I'm saying that we ought to have the same kind of presumptive trust in other scientists. Not necessarily paleontologists here, but sociologists. When we look at meta-studies that involve 100 different individual studies, and we see that 80 out of the 100 give us a similar result, that should give us some good grounds for believing that the result is real and not imaginary. You mentioned the possibility of confounding variables. Maybe, like with the Japanese, people's health is attributable to other causes besides their religion. And that's certainly possible. But if you can figure that out, and I can figure that out, surely medical researchers can figure that out as well. And they've done their best to try to screen that out. And indeed, they report that they do. Going back to the Religious Involvement and Morality Meta-Analysis Review by Michael E. McCullough, published in Health Psychology back in 2000, they looked at a dozen different confounding variables, and they screened them all out, and they found that the relationship between religions in the United States and health outcomes is robust. It perseveres despite all the various ways you might try to explain that away. You referred to the individuals that are in prison, how so very few of them are atheists, and that's quite true. I want to be very upfront about that. There are very, very few people in the United States prison system who, when asked what's your religion, say the word atheist. But so what? I mean, I've heard from atheists for years now that that isn't the measure of a true atheist. Self-reporting, self-identification. It's whether or not you believe in a God. And if we use that as the measure of genuine atheism and not self-identification using a particular label, then we're thrust back to those studies that I pointed to with Britain, which are also borne out here in the United States. Those who, when asked what the religions say, no religion, are much more likely to be in prison than the average person. Now, they may not self-identify using the word atheist, but nevertheless, that people with no religion are far more likely to be in prison relative to the average, and Christians far less likely. I think it's a meaningful result. We can kind of wish it away with this kind of convenient and tragically common atheist two-step. Counting it one way when you want to increase your numbers in the general population, counting it another way when you want to try to minimize those numbers in the prison population. You've also talked in your previous statement about how, again, Christianity has done some bad things and it leads to some bad outcomes for other people. And that's certainly true. If Christianity is really great for 90% of the population, that leaves 10% of the population for whom it's not so great in terms of outcomes. But so what? I mean, let's use an example, let's use an analogy. Think about vaccinations. The anti-vaxxer crowd is a bunch of goofballs. But they do have a point. Vaccines do hurt some people. If you go and you vaccinate yourself for, say, yellow fever, there is a statistically real but nevertheless small chance that you will die from that vaccination. It's a dangerous vaccination. Nevertheless, while vaccines hurt, they help people too. And they help a lot more people than they hurt. So that on the net, they're good things, and only goofballs pretend otherwise. I think we can apply the same kind of reasoning, for example, to Christianity. Yeah, Christianity is going to hurt some people. Some people are going to get ground up by parents that have goofy beliefs, or churches that have mean-spirited ministers, or they're going to get sold some weird idea and it's going to kind of relate to them. Some people are going to get hurt. But according to the data, if we're willing to trust researchers and scientists and peer-reviewed bodies, Christianity helps a great many more people than it hurts, so that when it comes to the net outcome, the world is better with Christianity than without it, in the same way that we are better with vaccines than without. And when you say that I'm